Hey everyone, and welcome to the Age Tech Connect podcast, where we dive deep with innovators, entrepreneurs, and industry leaders to figure out how technology can make the world a better place for older adults and those that care for them. Today, I'm having a conversation with George Netscher, the CEO of Safely You. Safely You is a groundbreaking AI-enabled platform that helps senior living communities detect and respond to falls and other critical events with greater accuracy and clarity. In my conversation with George today, we will be exploring the problem of falls amongst seniors, especially those with dementia, how greater insight leads to better resident care and a healthier business, and how AI is evolving to meet the needs of the modern senior living sector. All right, well, George, welcome. It's good to see you again. Happy to have you on the pod.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So, of course, we got to start off. I want to get into your personal story, George. Tell the people a little bit about where you came from and what got you into age tech.
Yeah, so Alzheimer's has always played a role in my family. So my mom's mom had it, and my mom's big sister had it, and we basically knew we had this 10-year window before my mom would be at the same point. She ended up doing the genetic testing. We knew she had the gene, and so I really just wanted to build something that could help folks with Alzheimer's disease before I was in that same point. That was about 10 years ago. Fast forward 10 years later, my mom lives in a community, has our system in place. Unfortunately, we got it there just too late. Had a really hard experience before Thanksgiving of last year, where the community had budgeted to put it in place for the coming year. I should have pushed harder, but she had a pretty bad fall, and so
Oh
now I've
no.
unfortunately seen the whole other side of it. Of she spent about a month in a skilled rehab facility and lost a lot of her strength, and
Yeah.
fast forward to today, and she still doesn't have it back. And so I think the Bigford folks talk about the higher path and have a really, I feel like totally nails what it feels like. It's like, I feel like we're on the lower path. And if you can just
Mhm.
get there before what could be a really significant event for somebody, you can do so much good in somebody's life. So we think about that a lot. That's the real why we're here. Of everyone's got their mom or their dad, and
Mhm.
or you yourself someday. And so that it's all about how do we support people like that.
Aging is such a personal thing. Everybody has a personal story around it. It sounds like yours is particularly poignant. I want to expand on, you said something about a higher path and a lower path. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I'm totally stealing this from the Bickford folks who do a really good job, I think, with
Mhm.
telling the story. But when we think about elder care, we think about how do we not just live long, but live well.
Mm.
And so how do we keep folks on the higher path? Meaning, if you have a fall, you can have a much worse quality of life after that. Whereas
Mhm.
if we could keep folks healthy and independent, then we can keep folks on that higher path instead of having you have a fall, then you're bedridden for some time, you lose a lot of your strength, now you're exercising less, now you get depressed and you're spending less time engaged with the community, and so these things tend to compound. The more we can do to keep folks on that higher path, the better things are for everybody.
Yeah, that's a really good concept because a lot of people think of aging as just a necessary decline, and they don't really consider the fact that like you can stay drifting up pretty high for a while, and there's also dips below that a lot of people don't think about, right? And so understanding what are the potential pathways that we could diverge on as we get older, and what are the levers that we can pull to keep us on the pathway that's more preferable rather than less preferable. Yeah, so I love that concept. Kind of digging into your personal story. So you said you got into it, you have a family history of Alzheimer's, and you've had a really harsh experience with falls. Tell me about what your experience was around putting your mom in a senior living community and having to go through that falls process.
Yeah. So I think the first thing I'll say is I came to really appreciate the value of community. So, my mom was living by herself and watching too much of the news all day and things
Yeah.
like that. And kids had moved out, and I really saw the difference of like being part of a community where she has friends, and like it makes that impact on the mental health I saw in such a big way. I remember at one point
Yeah.
talking to her on the phone and just being like, "Wait, mom, you're like happy." It's like
Mhm.
this is the first time I've heard you be happy in like 10. I think it was
Yeah.
maybe 10 years. And it's like, I don't know, really let myself think about that. It's really hard to think about. But then hearing like, wait, this is different. You're happy. And that is so meaningful. And so this industry talks about the value of like having a sense of community. I saw it. It's very real. Loneliness is a real thing. And there's a lot of
Mhm.
folks that are very isolated, particularly as they age. And the more we can support folks living in, more community type environments, I think the happier a lot of folks would be.
Yeah, I've heard depression be called the common cold of older adults, right?
Yeah.
It's I think there's some amazing stats. I couldn't pull them off right off the cuff, but it's like the majority of older adults are clinically diagnosed with depression. Like senior age adults, individuals living in senior care facilities, and that's in part, from what I understand, from the cognitive decline, but then also just the situation that they're in. They're a lot of times losing a lot of friends, losing a lot of independence, and it can be tough to manage all of that if you don't have the right structure around you.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's a really big deal, and there's some folks that are doing really good, important work around it. Shout out to like Rendeavor, for instance, of helping folks not feel so limited as they get older, or what it can feel that way. I've heard it be referenced as like the equivalent of smoking a pack of cigarettes a day in
Yeah.
terms of like life expectancy. And I got to see, I think a lot of it is like still feeling needed. At least that's what I felt of like
Mhm.
versus being like put to the side or whatever. It's like, no, you're still so valued for all these
Yeah.
reasons. When I saw that really clearly was, do you remember when some of the banks started going down? Silicon Valley Bank
Yeah. Mhm.
collapsed and then like First Republic Bank and a few other.
Yeah.
So this was a couple of years ago now, but we banked with Silicon Valley as a company. And then I did my personal banking with First Republic. That's where we had our home mortgage from and all of that. And it looked like we weren't going to be able to make payroll that week.
Oh my
And
gosh.
the money was in the bank account, but we wouldn't be able to access it. And then I couldn't like try to do anything from the personal side either because now this like contagion was spreading. And it turned out that our investors also were with one of those banks. And so they couldn't help with payroll. And
Yeah.
so our like backup plan was that my mom was gonna help cover with her life savings
Oh,
the
wow.
company payroll for that week. And what I totally saw is like it was the first time in a very long time that I had called her in like need of like, "Mom, I need you." And
Yeah.
it was just like no questions asked, like, "Yes, of course. We may not be able to pay the money back. I think we will, but we have to assume we might not be able to." And it was like, "Doesn't matter," like, and how much it meant to her to like be able to be there still, like that
Yeah.
she's still the person I call. I could see how, like, meaningful that was for her, so it was amazing for me, I'll say. I feel so fortunate to, have someone like that in my life, but the more that, like, older adults in general can just still be valued and needed for all the, like, amazing things that they bring, then that's
Mhm.
the key for me.
I love this so much, so I hate to bring it back, but I want to kind of bring it back to get a little bit background on you. And you had talked about, when you started Safely You and what inspired it. So like, what was the process of creating? What were the problems you saw and how'd you decide to enter in on this? Because as we've talked about, there's so many areas to address when you're wanting to create a solution for older adults, and specifically a solution for older adults with Alzheimer's. What was the nucleus that you started with?
I think putting it as the nucleus we started with is a great way of putting it because it was very much like a one step at a time and
Mhm.
figure out each piece. So it first started, I had the good fortune of getting accepted everywhere for grad school. So little humble brag, turned down
Mhm.
Stanford and MIT and Harvard and went to Berkeley because I found
There we
faculty
go.
also affected by Alzheimer's. So I was working in the Berkeley AI research lab at a time when self-driving cars were getting a lot of attention. It was in kind of 2014. We
Yeah.
passed a big inflection point in 2012 and kind of what AI could do. And so, folks all around me are looking at robotics and self-driving, and I'm really wanting to explore, like, there's got to be some way we can use these new tools in AI to support people with Alzheimer's disease.
Mhm.
And what is that overlap? And I didn't really have more than that. I didn't know that it would be false specifically or what else. And what became Safely was actually the third project that we worked on. And what we saw, I'll never forget being in that first community and that first ED saying, like, do you know what we have to do around an unwitnessed fall? I was like,
Mhm.
no, what happens? It's like, we have a policy that says, when in doubt, send them out. If we find somebody on the ground, we have to send them to the emergency room. And we used to be able to staff in a way that we could send a staff member with somebody when they went to the ER, but nobody can do that these days. Nobody can staff to that level. And so we're sending folks with, cognitive impairment to the emergency room by themselves, and they are not equipped for it. And it's just a really horrible experience for families. And we don't know how to fix it. Like, we just have to do it. And we don't necessarily know how they went to the ground or what we can change. And so I saw that there's a huge opportunity not just to use these tools to provide a much higher accuracy detection platform, but to really use it to give a voice to folks who lose that voice over time. So actually having the video is so valuable in that for folks who can't necessarily tell us what happened, we can see what happened and understand, did they actually fall or did they just get on the ground to pray? And if they did fall, how severe is it? And really, what is that unmet need that we can address? We had just hit 500,000 falls that we've supported with as a company. We're supporting with about
Wow, that's amazing.
25,000 a month. Yeah. Active in about 1,000 communities. And there's so many stories like that where, oh my God, I didn't realize that, one that has stuck with me for years is like this lady who had these two baby dolls that she was,
Mhm.
she thinks these are her infant kids and she's got them in her
Yeah.
twin size bed together and there's not enough space. And so she's sliding to the ground because there's three people in this bed. And
Mhm.
so the intervention was not medical at all. It was to get a bassinet next to the bed. She can see that her babies are safe and she can sleep in bed. And so it's like that being able to give that voice to folks who can't necessarily advocate for themselves or can't reliably was the real like, aha, there is such an opportunity to do this.
Mhm.
But then the kind of one step at a time was that we knew from the beginning the way AI works is based on data. The
Mhm.
more data you have, the more accurate of a system you can build, but also the more applications you can develop. And so we always knew that fall management is extremely critical, but it's also a step towards being able to deliver so much more value. And so fast forward to today, Safely is a whole platform, which includes
Mhm.
e-call, it includes staffing intelligence, it includes wellness intelligence. But it all started with that initial idea of like, how can we earn the right to be in that room and then we can collect this data that lets us train AI models to approach a whole bunch of different problems.
So I want to get into how you're implementing AI at a broader scale, but I want to go back to the quote I heard from one of your videos. Every room has a hero and every senior has a voice. That, what you just said, really resonates with that quote of, it's not about monitoring, right? It's creating a patient advocate right inside of the room. How are you guys utilizing that to really create change for these older adults?
Yeah, great shout out. And I love the research that you did seeing that. So originally, our mission statement was giving every senior a voice. And what we came to appreciate was, the folks that are providing care really are heroes. It's really hard work, it's really important work. And how do we give them superpowers? So, how
Yeah.
do we make them not just heroes, but superheroes and make it so that every resident has access to somebody that's going to take care of your mom and love your mom in the way that you want? And we came to appreciate that, like, the big, big challenge, the thing that we have to solve is that we just don't have enough people to care for all the people that need
Yeah.
caring. There's such a challenge with access. And in that environment where we have caregivers that are spread more and more thin, either the quality goes down or access gets restricted. And so we really believe that technology is that way to empower. There's ways to make the work much more efficient and take a lot of the stress off of it, so that caregivers can support more and more folks at one time. And so that's where we added the every room has a
Yeah.
hero. Go ahead.
And because you entered with Alzheimer's and dementia, that's kind of what brought you in.
Yeah.
I think this is something that I kind of forget, but I think a lot of people don't think about is how does mild cognitive impairment all the way to full blown dementia, how does this interact with the caregiver shortage? How does it interact with this problem of did this person fall? It adds a whole new layer to it. And I think a lot of people don't appreciate.
Yeah, it definitely does. It's like there aren't really good interventions that are available for folks with cognitive impairment.
Yeah.
There's things like strength training and balance training, and that stuff is really valuable, but it's not necessarily accessible for folks that have cognitive impairment. What we basically saw is like a huge gap there, but also you're right that it's not binary. It's a
Mhm.
spectrum. Like folks have different privacy, safety trade-offs over time. So one of the things that I think this industry is so great at is being able to provide choice of
Mhm.
we've got independent living, we've got assisted living, we've got different, you know, levels of care. And it's your choice about what you think is the right level for you. And the industry as a whole is meant to be kind of the expert that can help consult and guide you through a process. But ultimately, it's the resident's choice, it's family's choice.
Mhm.
And so we very much believe the same thing here. We started with memory care. Today, we support assisted living and memory care really well. We're doing more in independent living as well. And there's basically a different set of products that are really meant for each service line based on what are the choices that someone in that area might expect. So, we've got privacy preserving imaging, for instance. You can have clear video and memory care, or you might want something that's more privacy preserving as somebody is earlier in their journey, more cognitively healthy. And then once you recognize, hey, this person's fallen twice, we'd really like to actually know how they're going to the ground, then you have that opportunity to kind of move in as, that safety privacy trade-off shifts a bit. So I think that's a lot of what we think about is we started where the need is like really, really great and there aren't good solutions. But what the industry is looking for is like, I would like one comprehensive platform that can support the whole continuum. And it's
Mhm.
really cool to be at a point where we really are providing that for the first time.
Yeah, I love this. You're the first person I've heard use the term privacy safety continuum. And it's such an important concept because it's like, we've talked about what can happen to an older adult when they feel like they don't have agency and when they feel like they're kind of losing that sense of humanity. And I think privacy and dignity are a huge part of maintaining humanity into old age. And so if you have your son or a family member or somebody running a senior care home come to you and say, "Yeah, you really can't care for yourself. You need a camera watching you at all times." And you're just in that mild cognitive impairment stage, just kind of like, I don't
Doesn't
think
feel
I
great.
need that. Yeah, and then it becomes this feedback loop where, oh, maybe I am that old. Maybe I am just in decline, and it really kind of like wears on a person's soul to a degree. And so it's really great that you guys have that solution that can kind of meet people where they're at, right? Where it's like maximizing safety while also maximizing a person's humanity.
Folks say like what you do for someone, you take away from them.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
so like the more you can empower independence, the better it is for everybody. Even if it can, the same is true in childcare, right? It can be really
yeah,
tempting to like, jump in and you want to help and it's all well intended, but you have to hold yourself back and like let them, do things themselves. And particularly we see that being a big difference in independent living versus the AL memory care side, where it's like
yeah.
it cannot be about taking away from someone if you're putting any kind of monitoring in place, and the point is like, we need to know when we can take more things away from you, that is so not. You got to earn the right. The person has to want you in the room. You have to be providing real value to them, or you will just get a tremendous amount of pushback because you're not really, serving the folks who you need to be serving.
Yeah, so tell me a little bit more about how Safely You actually works. So we talked about kind of like the end state of what it accomplishes at a high level, but how are you guys actually accomplishing this balance between privacy, safety, across the continuum of care?
Our fall management product and really kind of our flagship product that a lot of folks know us for, really intended for folks with cognitive impairment. What we do is we put a device that looks like a camera in the private room. We have truly world-class accuracy. So we generate on the order of one false alarm every 2 years, and we detect 99.5% of the events. So we only miss 5 in 1,000.
Wow,
So yeah, truly, truly world-leading accuracy.
that's amazing.
And the way we basically support privacy in that care setting is that we detect an event and we make only that video available. So no other video ever leaves the device. It's
Mhm.
just that video, the timer on the ground, along with usually 10 minutes before and after. And that lets folks basically understand how this person went to the ground. If you're in a hospital setting, being able to have, something that detects as soon as somebody's getting out of bed and you can go get there before that person ends up on the ground can be valuable. In the AL memory care world, we're not staffed to that level where someone can go just get there in time.
Mhm.
And so we wanted to be really conscious of those workflows of how do we not put more burden on the teams, but enable a world where we can really provide better care and reduce the burden on teams from sending folks to the emergency room unnecessarily and all of that. And
But I think a
so
lot of individuals listening to this might not understand the value of knowing how a person got to the ground or why they fell. I know you touched on that a bit of when in doubt, send them out. But to a layperson listening, it's kind of like, okay, so I found out this person was on the ground praying. Why does it matter?
so what? Yeah, I appreciate you
Yeah.
calling it out. I think there were two big insights we found. One is that about 30% of our on the ground events is somebody who's actually going to the ground intentionally.
Yeah.
So like they're going on the ground to pray, but you come into the room and you don't know that. And so you have to assume they could have hit their head. So you're sending them to the emergency room. That'll cost the family like usually $4,000 or $5,000, depends on whether they're admitted to the hospital or not. And it's a really painful experience. I was in the ER with my mom for 9 hours before we were admitted. It's tough. And so we're removing what is a really frustrating experience for families just on that piece. But then the other big piece is that we'll consistently see only about 1 in 30 on the ground events results in a severe injury. that means we have, 29 out of 30 chances to understand what somebody's unmet need is and address it often before an injury happens. So we just did a big study across 4 years of data. And what we see is that on average, we'll reduce the number of falls by about 50% by understanding what that unmet need is and addressing that root cause, often before injuries happen. So there's a tremendous opportunity to just like bring insights and understanding in a way that's really actionable and also protects folks from both a privacy perspective and a liability perspective and so on.
I love the example you gave earlier because it's the perfect example of just, wow, that's a stupid solution, but dang, it works, right? Where you go, oh, she's got the baby dolls. And what's our best fall prevention method here? Give her a place to put the baby dolls, right? And then she doesn't get off on and off the ground and doesn't have that risk. And I think hospital systems, senior care facilities, they spend all this time trying to create these blanket solutions for these big cost drivers and these big clinical detriment drivers like falls. And what you're saying is that a solution like Safely You really gives these facilities the ability to customize their solutions in
Totally.
ways that you would never think of if you didn't have that information beforehand.
Yeah, just like really deliver person-centered care. Like, what is this
Mhm.
person like? Actually meet them where they are. What is their actual unmet need, and how do we address it instead of just having a blanket like, let's try consistent lighting or let's try this other thing.
Mhm.
I would say the other piece we've seen is like real staff training opportunities as well. This industry, by and large, doesn't have an opportunity to get a lot of feedback. Like, we might put a policy
Yeah.
in place, we don't actually know if it's being followed or not. And all the folks on our clinical team are certified dementia care practitioners. And so our team reviews every single fall video and works with the community to provide intervention. So they're not expecting the community to be experts. They're doing this analysis and coming in and saying, here's the kinds of things I'm seeing. And they'll also see things on like the staff side of just like, you may not, be thinking about it. You're rushing of like, okay, we just found a fall. We need to call 911 and so on. But being able to take the time and lower yourself to the ground and get them a pillow and be present with them in a time that can be, can be the hardest moment of somebody's life. And so we
Mhm.
also see those like real opportunities to support not just the resident, but also the teams. And there's been some awesome impacts from that as well. We had an organization tell us they got a 75% reduction in workers' comp claims.
Mhm.
So, like,
Yeah.
it is about not just giving every resident a voice, but the staff are, probably the most important part of this whole puzzle. So how do we really give them those superpowers?
Yeah, because in order to care for older adults, we need to care for the people that care for them, right? And sometimes we forget that very important element of it.
If I do just a really good job taking care of my teams, they'll do a great job taking care of the residents.
Mhm. And I always talk about this. I think become kind of a thing to call out healthcare providers for, doing their job poorly. There's a lot of issues to call out with the Western medical system and the way that we run things, but it's also important to remember that most of the people that have dedicated their lives to providing care for anybody really, but for older adults, like they want to provide the care and they want to be given the tools to do that well. And it's like if you're seeing where you have a bunch of these care providers that aren't providing good care, it's probably because they're not being enabled to provide good care, and it's not a character flaw on their part.
I mean, if anything, it's like good care is happening despite the systems
Yeah,
in many
yeah.
cases, right? I couldn't agree more. If like as I've really kind of fallen in love with this industry, the
Mm.
people, because the people in it are like, you get this like amazing overlap between people who like really want to make the world better,
Yeah.
but also want to serve older adults. So it's like this low ego, really humble, like we're trying to do this really important work for a vulnerable population. And it's just like it's a really great community to be part of.
So I'm a physical therapist by training, and when I joined my physical therapy program, my wife, then girlfriend at the time, she's like, "So how's everybody in the class?" I go, "You know what? Every single one of them is actually pretty cool. I think, just healthcare selects for a group of people that are smart, competent, and sociable, and they have a mission, right? And it's great to see solutions like yours really allowing people to achieve the mission to their fullest potential."
Yeah, there's a lot more to be done. I will say, like, something I feel in the industry is that there's a lot of confusion right now with all the AI stuff happening.
Yeah.
It's really hard to tell. We're in like the second or third inning of what these AI platforms will look like. So how do I make an investment that's going to last like years? How do I
Yeah.
know that I'm like backing the right horse and all of that, and I'm not going to have to change this out in 2 years time when things are just moving so quickly?
I really want to dig into that in a moment because I think that's an important topic that a lot of people are going to be interested in. Before we go into that, I do want to learn more about, how your product has progressed, especially since you really do seem to be approaching this business almost like a scientist. And I say that as a compliment. I think Mallory sent me a white paper, and I was reading, and I was like, "This reads like a scientific article." It's like, we have this introduction and the intervention, and here's what we found, and here's the stats, and here's why it's clinically relevant. I was like, "Oh, this is pretty good. I like this." But in approaching this like a scientist, what have you seen in the data that's made you go, "Okay, this is where we need to go next"? Because I imagine you've been able to gather a lot of data, being in, what'd you say, over 1,000 communities now? All right, so
That's
that's
right.
so many data points. What have you learned from all of that?
Yeah, great question. And I appreciate saying thinking like a scientist as a compliment. I don't know how to think any other way. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we definitely see a lot. I think we see acuity levels rising. I was looking at some of our data and we can see that the fall rate for somebody when they first start on our program is significantly higher today than it was when we first
Oh,
started the
wow.
company. And so we can see in our data that people are waiting, they're moving in later, they're moving in when they're at a higher acuity. And so there is a real opportunity to like, how do we support folks at that point? We also very much see an opportunity to support the full continuum of people. I think is the big thing we see, and that we did a study on the cost of falls, and about 4 years ago, that was about a $5,000 cost for the operator in terms of the cost of falls, and that data is on our website if anybody wants to go look at it. But if you pull together the cost of potential litigation and move outs and lost vacancy time, or that increased vacancy time, there's about a $5,000 total cost, or there was in 2022. We repeated that this year, and we included the cost of care more broadly. But as part of it, we looked at the cost of falls again, and that number had roughly doubled in just that 4 year period.
Oh,
That
wow.
it's about a $10,000 cost now. Like, what is the actual cost of a fall event? Turns out it's about $10,000 when you add up each of these things. And so I think from a number of different points, we're seeing acuity going up and we're seeing demand increasing and we're seeing the next generation of folks moving in. We're not just moving from, one genre of music to another. I think I heard somebody put it as like we're moving from Frank Zappa to the Beatles, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
but there's a different set of needs. Like my mom knows how to use Lyft, for
Yeah.
instance. So the elopement of 2026 is like, hey, they might not just wander to the bus stop. They might actually like be able to call Lyft
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
end up. And so, how do you think about those kinds of challenges? I think we see a real demand for care platforms that can help and help not just from a care standpoint, but also from a real operational standpoint. So, the reason our system also includes e-call and it also includes we have the ability to tell how much time staff spend in every room.
Mhm.
We have the ability to draw wellness insights, how much time somebody's spending sleeping or spending isolated, things like that. There's an opportunity to really pull out kind of the blind spots in the community and make sure that we really understand the level of care that we're providing. So what we saw is, I think, from just a pure ROI perspective, in memory care, there's huge opportunity to extend length of stay. What we're
Mhm.
seeing on the assisted living side is that there's huge opportunity to make sure that we have folks in the right level of care and we really understand what their care needs are by having technology platforms like this that drive real increases in your care margin. And I see a lot of folks talking about, we used to think about care as just like a cost part of the business. And you really should be thinking about it as like there's a real revenue opportunity there to
Yep.
not just deliver services people really want, but also have that conversation with the family of, hey, it's really time that we think about the next level of care because we're seeing these needs.
That's interesting. So really lay it out. What does it look like to implement safely you, right? We've talked a lot about, oh, this solution can do this at the high level, but how does that look if a senior living community or a memory care facility were to implement your platform? What would they get? What would be involved? And what would the patients and the clinicians see immediately?
Yeah. So one, I'll say residents versus patients
Residents, sorry, yeah.
in the senior living community. We don't just to do the minor plug there. It's like, and you don't have to include this if you don't want to. Someone's a patient when they're sick, like when they're in a
Mhm.
hospital
Yeah.
versus like just because I have Alzheimer's doesn't mean I'm a patient, I'm a
Yeah.
resident in
Yeah.
that community or yeah.
No, I
Don't
like that
identify.
correction. I think words have power. When people internalize this idea of patient, right? They go, "Oh, I'm sick," right? So resident doesn't
Totally. They
necessarily have
do.
that impact. Yeah.
They do. And I'm on the Argentum board. And one of the things I'm plugging with Argentum is like, we actually as an industry shouldn't be calling everything falls. because
Mhm.
you heard me use the term like an on the ground event, and
Yeah.
that might be a little too scientific, but I think we should be calling it a lowering by default,
Mm.
and then it
Yeah.
may be a fall. But if we're calling everything a fall, words do have power, and you set a negative expectation there when actually that person may have just gotten on the ground to pray. And
Yeah.
so if you kind of like start with it as like, we had a lowering here, we're not sure exactly what happened, then it's a pretty different story than like particularly we see that, not to get too far off track, but we see that on the liability side of like,
Yeah.
it may seem like this person had 14 falls, and then if you actually look at the videos, it's like, no, they lowered themselves to the ground 12 times. And so if we're saying those are 14 falls, it's like those weren't falls. Like, we
Yeah.
had 12 lowerings and then two real falls. And that's a pretty different story for, a family member.
Yeah, 'cause by
Uh,
that criteria, like I have falls all the time, right? Go out and do some burpees. I just did, 30 reps of falls. It's,
right.
so I
That's
really
right.
like that reframing.
Yeah, and those wouldn't be detected by our system, by the way. You asked what it takes to implement our system. You would basically have a device that's placed in every room, and then folks that want to have a pendant can have a pendant, and there are e-call buttons that can be placed in each room. The little plug I had there is we do have kind of the most accurate AI capabilities,
Yeah.
and so, for instance, we don't send an alert if it's a staff member going to the ground. Our AI can tell the difference between a staff and a resident. So if you were in there doing burpees, it actually wouldn't send
Yeah.
alerts out. Whereas, if there's a resident going to the ground, that would be detected and escalated, all without folks requiring a wearable device. And
Yeah.
that's what let us build then our staffing intelligence, is that we actually did it to make our fall detection more accurate. But
Mm.
then we realized like, oh, we can just tell how much time staff spend in every room. There's huge value in that. And I
Yeah.
believe we're the only ones that can do that without staff having to wear a device or manually input data or anything like that. So we see, once you can then start surfacing that data, there's huge opportunity to really understand.
And the staffing oversight is, I think, a important part that often gets overlooked because I think at the outset it can make it seem like, oh, we're monitoring or we're trying to be big brother over our staff. We're gonna punish them if they're not in the room the right time. But there's also a huge angle to like staff want to be acknowledged and they want to know that when they did their job right, they did. They get recognized for it, and it actually makes a difference. Is that an element to what you guys are implementing?
Totally. And you're so right to call it out. I love that you went right there because you do have to be really thoughtful. And particularly, it's so easy for systems like that to be used to become like punitive. And then that becomes, especially if staff have to wear a device to,
Yeah.
understand for you to get that data. And then you choose to make like any change in headcount, whether you even use that data or not, people are gonna like make their own story and be like, "Oh, they're using
Yeah.
this thing to track us, and now blah blah blah." So you do have to be really sensitive and thoughtful. What we've seen is when done the right way, you can actually create some really good like friendly competition.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
for instance, we track our response times, and the communities we work with are amazing. So this is all credit to them. But we also definitely take pride in how few false alarms we generate. So when people get
Mhm.
an alert from us, they're responding to it right away, and our average response time is on the order of 2 minutes from when
Oh, wow.
an alert is sent out to a staff member being in the room, which is amazing, right?
Yeah, that is really,
And
really
we
good.
saw, yeah, before we launched, what we saw is the average time was about 40 minutes. Coming back to thinking as a scientist, we
Mm.
put it in what we
Yeah.
called offline mode, where we weren't sending alerts out because we wanted to really see our accuracy. We also wanted to have that baseline data to compare against. And so the difference between somebody being on the ground for 40 minutes, like think about that, how long that would feel when you're just stuck like between your bed and the wall and you're just hoping
Yeah.
someone will come find you. And
It can be
versus
deadly, that time
totally,
difference.
yeah,
Yeah.
time can be tissue and all of that for sure.
Mhm.
And then if you're kind of surfacing that data, but doing it in a more positive light, we definitely see folks who between one community and another will be like, wait, your response time was this and
Yeah.
ours was that? Like, okay, let me go. And so done in the right way, you can really encourage positive behavior. But I think it is with that kind of thing, it's all about how you talk to your teams about it and all of that.
'Cause I'll reiterate, I mean, caregivers wanna provide good care, right? So if you could they wanna get there quicker, right? And it's like, if they're not, it's probably because they don't have the right tools to do so. Now we've touched on a bunch. The way that AI is implemented at Safely You is, it's faster, it's more accurate, it's more robust, and I think, you touched on this earlier, so I wanna bring it back around. A lot of people in this senior care facility are just, and really in all industries these days, just inundated with, oh, our AI powered solution does this, and oh, powered by AI. And you kind of get this like, well, it all kind of falls under this black box. And if you don't know anything about AI, you're just thinking, oh, they just plug Chat GPT or Claude into this. So, what makes the way that y'all implement AI at Safely You different?
Yeah, great question. We're definitely not just like a, wrapper around Claude or things like that. So if you look at kind of the way self-driving cars have come out to market, that's a really good way of like thinking about how a lot of these technologies will develop. And so with self-driving cars, what's basically taken 10 years and why it's felt like it's been so long for
Mhm.
these the promise of these to be realized. And now you're starting to see in certain cities that Waymo is fully automated,
Oh, yeah.
all of that stuff.
They have taken over Atlanta.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Have you been in one?
Yes, I have.
It's pretty crazy, right? The first time you're in.
It's wild, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah.
I
Um,
won't take too long if I go on my Waymo rant, so
no, I think
yeah.
an increasing number of us have had that experience. Or
Mhm.
I got in one in San Francisco and I needed to be in a meeting in 10 minutes and Google
Yeah.
Maps said it was 8 minutes away. But then I got in a Waymo and I forgot they don't take highways. And the Waymo said it's gonna be
Yeah,
22 minutes. And when there's not a person there, you're just like,
yeah, you can't do
I can't
anything
tell
about it.
you. There's no one I can tell to get on the highway. So now
Yeah.
I'm just, well, I guess I'm stuck in this car now. But a whole different set of problems. Use that as an analogy to say when Waymos get stuck, there's actually a remote operator that's going to
Mhm.
come in and drive the car
Yeah.
manually to get it unstuck, and then it'll go back to fully automated mode. And you've seen the same with like Teslas, that, like
Mhm.
you have to keep your hands on the wheel and so on. And so there's basically this journey that AI goes through from of needing less and less of a human in the loop. And that's basically allowing the automated system to do is see more and more of these corner cases. Like this
Mhm.
example of like when it was this lighting condition and it's raining and it couldn't tell the difference between these things. And the way AI works is it learns from examples. So the more examples it sees, the smarter and smarter it gets. And so as you're collecting that data, you're seeing those corner cases and it's getting smarter and smarter until we get to the point where we can be fully automated. And so the very same thing is true here of the reason our fall detection is the most accurate is because we have the most data here. We've been able to train these AI models on all this time. But that's also why we can address the next set of challenges and harder challenges. So when we think about things like elopement and medication management and all sorts of other, there's so many opportunities if you can have eyes in the room. And the real key is like having that data to be able to see enough corner cases so that we can see in every different potential condition and things like that versus what you're going to get with like an off the shelf model. Like if you just plug Claude in, it doesn't have that experience where it hasn't seen those corner cases. It doesn't have access to that data. And so it will, for instance, if you do your burpees, it's going to, think that that's somebody on the ground and not be able to tell
Yeah.
the difference.
Probably just call the cops because that's obviously an insane person doing burpees in the patient's or the resident's room, I should say.
When we were first starting the company, when we needed to like bootstrap our data set, every
Yeah.
time for like years, every time I visited a community, I would just go lay down in some resident rooms.
Yeah.
Occasionally, when someone would be like, "Are you okay?" Yeah, I'm fine. I'm
Nurses are
fine.
like, "Who's that guy laying on the floor in all of our resident rooms?"
Honestly,
But
you're not right.
that's dedication right there. That's a real founder. That's how you
Yeah.
know. To plug your background one more time, just so the viewers, you guys know George is the real deal. I mean, AI researcher at Berkeley, right? UC Berkeley. You were really on this AI trend before it became cool, before ChatGPT started taking everything over. So, putting on your researcher professor hat, people are going to want to know if they're looking for different AI solutions out there, even if it's not in senior care, but kind of specifically focused towards that market. What are like the red flags and green flags? Like, how do you look under the hood when somebody's advertising to you AI powered solution?
That's a really good question. And I did drop out of the PhD program, so definitely wouldn't put on a professor hat or anything like that. But
But you started a successful company with it,
yeah,
so gotta
yeah.
respect it.
Thank you. It's really hard, is what I would even say right now. Like being a software developer in April of 2026 is different than it was in December of 2025.
Oh yeah.
Like these tools are moving so quickly that it's hard to keep up. And so I guess the way I think about it is like in this industry, it's so much about the partnership and aligning yourself with partners who have the same set of values you have and who are going to keep building and like developing, like you can develop the future together because we're so early. There's so much more that we need to do here. And so I would align with partners that you think you can trust to be delivering that value that you want to see over time. In terms of the way like I evaluate tools, it's really hard. I don't know that I have any words of wisdom or green flags or red flags other than empathy of like things are moving really quickly. And I'm happy to, try to be a help if I can.
But you give some good pointers, right? So make sure that whoever's giving you an AI tool is mission driven and it's somebody that you feel you can build with, right? Because if you're a senior living operator and you have no idea where the technology is going in the next 10 years, but you know that you have a partner that you can trust and that you can navigate that difficult landscape with, I mean, if that's all you can get, that's pretty good.
Yeah, because there is a lot of really nefarious stuff you can do, right?
Yeah.
But it's like I mentioned, we only keep data when we've detected an event.
Mhm.
It's very easy for us to like surface, like only show that in the user interface, but actually keep all of the data, keep data 24/7. And it's very beneficial for AI companies to keep as much data as they can to make the most advanced models.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really hard for if you're the consumer to know what data is actually being kept and what's not and all of that. And so that's where definitely aligning with the right partners, especially if you're working with sensitive data like video, residence apartment. There's a lot of stuff that can be happening if you're, working with somebody who's not going to be the most trusted partner.
Yeah, and I feel like it speaks a lot that, you as an AI company are willing to admit that, right? It's like it's knowing where the pitfalls are and where you could get unethical is the best way that you avoid ethical issues, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
And we see that in like every industry happening right now, by the way. You see it with Claude versus ChatGPT, OpenAI and
Yeah.
Anthropic. You see, like OpenAI is like kind of becoming the evil company that's willing to take the
Yeah.
military contracts and whatever, and Claude is being looked at as like the more on the side of
Mhm.
good. And I see that happening in like every vertical of like there's the companies that are willing to just do whatever it takes to make the giant business, and there are companies that like want to do things the right way and have the right protections and all of
Yeah.
that.
I imagine that'll have to be its own podcast is AI ethics. And if we record it this year, it'll probably be entirely different next year. So the last thing I want to get into is because we have, quite a few entrepreneurs and people who are interested in having their own startup or people that want to solve problems just like you did for their loved one or for themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about what your founder journey was going from UC Berkeley? You said you dropped out of the PhD program to do this. Like, how'd you make that switch? What was the final straw that inspired you to do that? And then what were some of the keys to your early success in building this up?
Yeah, talking to the founders out there and, people that are maybe thinking about starting a company and so on, happy to share some of my perspective. So I was a very weird PhD student in that I had no intention of getting a PhD. Like the hope was that we could figure out something that we could build a business around and spin a company out. And if we found that right thing, then we would make that leap. And so I really had basically 2.5 years of just creative freedom, getting to
Very nice.
explore a whole bunch of different ideas and see what really landed. And there was a lot of value in that time of like before you take, potential venture capital and then you're really on a clock of needing to hit milestones and things like that, having time to just be creative and explore. And even though I'm only on the like, 30K a year graduate student stipend and
Yeah.
trying to, my wife was covering the rent in the Bay Area and all of that. Very fortunate to have her. And then I would say our first rounds of funding were hard because there really wasn't a clear path to how do you build a venture backable business serving elder care. So we've now raised over $170 million, which is crazy.
Amazing. Yeah.
But our first round raising 500K was really freaking hard. And it was not because, people saw the demographic shifts and there was a big need here, but the go to market was really not clear. And
Yeah.
so we relatively quickly got to a point where we could really demonstrate reproducible clinical value. We did a lot of that with grants from the university and then spinning out of the university. We had SBIR awards where we ended up getting
Yeah.
about $4 million from the NIH and NSF, which was just this amazing, non-dilutive funding. And, it really pains me to see some of that funding being restricted because
It
it
just got reapproved, by the way, I
did
think
it. That's
yesterday.
amazing.
Yeah. So
That's
it's one of
amazing.
a few good things we're hearing from, the government these days, but that
Honestly,
was
like
good
we
news.
can't
So we're back online with the SBIRs.
That's great news.
Yeah.
I'm happy to hear that. What I see is that it's hard to track and trace, right? Like we estimate we've saved over $200 million for the federal government, but they don't know that. Like,
Yeah.
that little bit of, investment that they made in the company, they have no way of knowing that it actually like has yielded all of this, savings for the federal government. So I definitely believe in like that basic science and research funding yields so much innovation and all of that. So we did our first, we started in one community and we showed an 80% reduction in the falls. We wanted to make sure that was reproducible. We went to 11 communities. Shout out to Carlton Senior Living was our first customer. And once we showed that those results could really be reproduced, then we were basically raising our rounds of venture capital. And it was about figuring out the go-to-market. And that's what made those first rounds hard, is that the go-to-market was really not clear. In those early days, VCs basically want to see you growing 3x year over year. And how do you do that in elder care? There are a whole bunch of companies that have tried selling to payers and have tried going direct to consumer, and maybe tried selling to home care agencies. And what we found is that senior living really is the place where tech should be developed, because the go-to-market actually works here, where you can
Yeah.
demonstrate outcomes with a couple of communities, and then operators will expand and capital partners will make those investments if you're driving real value at the community level that leads to real NOI. And then you can basically grow at that pace with that land and expand motion. So if you're really driving value, then folks will bring you to more locations, and cracking that nut was a big part of the journey. And so that's where I so believe this is the place for age tech to be developed, and why senior living is such a great spot, especially right now. It's,
Yeah.
having been in the space through the pandemic when it was really hard to buy and all of that, really hard to buy solutions like Safely You. Now, like, because there hasn't been new construction, occupancy is going up and up. Like, we definitely need to be building more to serve all the consumers. So don't get me wrong there, but the folks in the industry really can buy in a way that they couldn't, just a few years ago. And so it's a really ripe moment to be developing new solutions and serving older adults in this industry.
You start off with this, you're mission driven. I want to help people, but at some point you got to have a profitable business. And I think, especially for a lot of scientists and clinicians, the idea of profitability and making money can somewhat be a dirty word, right? As it somehow, taints the mission, or taints your goodwill towards the thing if you want to go make money off of it. And I'm always a huge advocate, I'm sure you are as well, of just like, this is how things get into the real world. Like, in order for it to exist, it has to be profitable. It has to provide real world monetary value. So it's like, if you want to see that mission expand, you also have to learn these skill sets in the business realm as well.
Totally agree. We thought about being a nonprofit in the early days, and that was
Mhm.
the exact same. We felt the exact same way. It's like, to help all the people we want to help and really make an impact. How do we make this really scalable? And you almost have to take that part, just push it to the side and don't even think
Yeah.
about the mission driven side. And just, if I can just make this a freaking great business, and people want to put, money into the business because it's just a freaking great business, then that lets us like attract capital, invest more in building great products, deliver real value. And then, yes, like, the stuff we want to build is all stuff that, makes the world better. And a lot of folks in this company have been personally impacted themselves. So that's, at least for me personally, what is like, you're going to work really long hours if you're building a startup. You're going to go through long, hard times. There were 2 years in the early days when I was the only person in the company with a car, and I would spend
Yeah.
every Sunday driving to our communities and just fixing broken hardware. And that actually was really great learnings for me, of just spending a ton of time in communities and really seeing like how the work is done and what residents are doing, and having residents come up to me and say like, "Well, you're smart, aren't you?" And it's like, you know what,
Yeah.
I am. And I needed
Thank
that.
you. Yeah, nothing boosts your ego like, working with, especially as a guy working with like old, little old ladies and stuff
Totally.
like that. They
Yeah.
come up and go, "You're so handsome," and I go, "Thank you so much."
Thank you. Yes, I needed
I
that.
needed that today.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I
My
totally agree.
favorite part
So
about working with old folks is the compliments. It's what I do it for. Yeah.
that's right. So
All right.
I'll just to wrap up there, it's like, I don't
Yeah.
think you need the thing that gets you up in the morning to
Mhm.
work as hard as you need to work and all of that. If you're just in it for the money, you're not gonna make it. Or there's easier places to make money. But it's like, building a startup is hard, it's gonna take a lot out of you, it's gonna take real grit, and so you gotta be really clear on your why, but then you almost need to push it to the side and just, "What do I need to do to build a freaking great business?"
I love that. And I think that's a great place to call it, because I've already kept you a little bit too long. So I know that you will be out with Safely You at the post acute and senior living workshop at the Thrive Center at Louisville, right?
Will be.
So, yep. So if anybody is listening to this, is interested in learning more about George or Safely You, or just want to have a conversation or follow up on anything we talked about, connect with them there. George, where else can the people get in touch with you?
Definitely our website is a great place to go learn more about our products and things like that. We're active on LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to connect with me and send an outreach. I try to keep an eye on all of those. And, don't hesitate to reach out to other folks that are within Safely You. Everyone here really cares. And I think we hear a lot of really great perspectives from them as well.
Well, perfect. George, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks for having me.